Good morning. Today we're going to start Unit 8, Factors that Influence Economic Choice. This is more on the basics of economics, but this is understanding our economy and how business works. This is the unit for understanding how we're going to make money as a people. So should be interesting stuff. Let's get going. These are the main things you need to know by the end of this unit. These things will be on the test. I know the last unit primarily the test was from your readings. This will be from both. So let's take a few things. First and foremost, today we're going to be talking about scarcity, so make sure you underline that. Also, all choices have opportunity cost, understanding that. Economic systems influence people's incentives. We'll be talking about what incentives are and how they influence us. And profits, how they often act as an incentive in the market economy. We'll talk more about that in capital investment. So yeah, we'll pick up there and we'll talk about the difference between a free market, a planned market, the different types, and how supply and demand works. So let's go for it. We're only going to watch the first part of it, though.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Hill.
And I'm Mr. Clifford, and welcome to Crash Course Economics.
Today we're going to focus on macroeconomics and talk about economic systems and the nations that really like them. Wink, wink.
Economic systems and the nations that really like them. Wink, wink. What does that even mean?
I'm trying to come up with a spicy title for today's show. Okay, try this one on. How about economic systems and the nations that are attracted to them?
No.
Or when economic systems and nations hook up.
I don't even know what to say. Stan, roll the intro.
So to pick up where we left off, we all have wants. Food, cell phones, a good education, the $10,000 gold Apple Watch. But like the Rolling Stones tell us, you can't always get what you want. We don't have an infinite amount of resources like raw materials, workers, and time. So we have to make choices. Speaking of, who likes this? I'm gonna go change shirts. I'm gonna make another choice. So this shirt, it's way better, right? Anyway, we as a social order have to figure out three things. Number one, what to produce. Number two, how to produce it. And number three, who gets it. Answer these three questions and you've got an economic system. There's a ton of backstory here about the history and evolution of economic thought. We'll get to that in a future video. In today's video, we're gonna chat about the world today. Let's take a look at two different economic systems, market economies and planned economies.
It all comes down to who owns and controls the factors of production. These are the major inputs required to produce stuff, and Karl Marx classified them as land, labor, and capital. He even wrote a book about it, Das Kapital. In a planned economy, the government controls the factors of production, and it's easy to assume that's the same thing as communism or socialism, but that's not quite right. According to Karl Marx, the theory of communism may be summed up in the single sentence, abolition of private property. So true communism is a classless society. When I say classless, I'm talking about a social order where everyone owns the factors of production and output is distributed equally. Kind of like China and Cuba and the former Soviet Union, except not at all. In practice, no country has ever truly been communist. There's a lot of countries that are socialist. Often socialism has both private property and some public ownership and control of industry. The goal is to meet specific collective objectives and to provide free and equal access to things like education and healthcare. In both communism and socialism, there is economic planning, and the government, usually in the form of some bureaucratic agency, helps decide what to produce, how to produce it, and who gets it. Now, if an economy is completely controlled by the government, down to the number of shoes that should be produced, that's called a command economy.
On the other side of the spectrum, we have free market economies. In free market or capitalist economies, individuals own the factors of production, and the government keeps its nose out of the stuff and adopts a laissez-faire or hands-off approach to production, commerce, and trade. In free market economies, businesses make things like cars, not to do good for mankind, but because they want to make a profit. Since consumers, that's me and you, get to choose which car we want, car producers need to make a car with the right features at the right price. Economists call this the invisible hand. Ooh. If consumers prefer one company's car, that business will make more profit and have an incentive to produce more cars. Car companies that don't offer the cars people want will disappear. Maybe you've heard of the DeLorean? It was a cool looking car, but not a car that many people wanted to buy. Apparently it was expensive, underpowered, and poorly made. And it didn't actually travel through time. Anyway, this concept applies to all other markets like cell phones or shoes. Scarce resources will go to the most desired use, and they'll be used efficiently. more or less. After all, if a business is wasteful and inefficient or makes something that no one wants to buy, then some other business will make a similar product that's either better or cheaper or both. If there's no consumer demand for a product, resources won't be wasted producing it. We often take markets for granted, but look at the alternative. Assume instead that a government agency was in charge of deciding exactly which types of cars and cell phones and shoes to make. Do you think they could quickly respond to changes in tastes and preferences? If there was only one government monopoly producing cars, do you think they'd be produced efficiently?
So the invisible hand of the free market is the idea that individuals and businesses meet society's needs when they seek their own self-interest. Competitive markets with profit-seeking businesses will have an incentive to produce high-quality products as efficiently as possible. In the words of Adam Smith, it's not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their regard to their own interest. Now, it looks like the free market's perfect and we don't even need a government, but that's not quite right. There's a bunch of things the government must do because free markets won't. First is maintain the rule of law. We need laws and police and contracts and courts to keep everything orderly. Second, we need public goods and services like roads and bridges and education and defense, because goods can't get to consumers if bridges are falling down, and consumers can't make good choices if they're not educated, and no one really cares about buying the new iPhone if there's a bomb dropping on your head. Third, the government sometimes needs to step in when markets get things wrong. But what does that even mean?
Well, let's go back to producing cars. The free market produces what we consumers want to buy. And when we buy, we're thinking about what a car looks like, if it's the color we want, maybe if it's safe, what it costs. Most of us aren't worried about air pollution. We don't think much about who made our car, what they were paid, what the conditions at the factory were like. That's when government steps in to regulate production. In a free market economy like the United States, you might think that the government doesn't tell car producers what types of cars to produce and how to produce them, except that it does. Cars need to meet strict emissions and safety standards, and there are laws dictating how much manufacturers can pollute and how workers should be treated. And here's the big takeaway. Modern economies are neither completely free market nor planned. There's a spectrum of government involvement. For example, on one end we have North Korea. They have a command economy where production is entirely controlled by the government. On the other end we have countries like New Zealand. They have private property, few taxes, and few regulations. In the middle we have the rest of the world. So most modern economies are actually mixed economies with both free markets and government intervention.
And a great way to explain a mixed economy is by looking at something called the circular flow model. Let's go to the thought bubble.
All right, we'll pick up with this in just a moment. So let's talk about some things that we're going to be looking at. Factors of production, things you need to know, and things you need to have goods and services. First and foremost, just like they say on the TV show, location, location, location. It doesn't do any good to build a Starbucks in the middle of nowhere. If there's no one there to buy the coffee, then you have wasted your product. Also, it doesn't make real good sense to offer a fresh seafood restaurant when you're 1,000 miles away from the ocean. So you have to think about where the location of what you have available, which is why the area in which we live in in the past has been such a manufacturing of involved in manufacturing of tobacco products, manufacturing in wood products such as furniture markets, and of course producing textiles. That is because of where we were located. That's right, we had plenty of trees available to do the furniture, tobacco farmers growing the tobacco nearby to be able to make tobacco products, and of course we had cotton and other factories resources available to be able to make textiles. So this area has traditionally been a tobacco, wood, and textile area, and it is because those natural resources were available. It wouldn't be very smart to try to put together something that isn't available here. Also, you have to think about where are you going to get your money, your capital. Now, capital comes in two forms. One, the physical money itself, investment. Who's going to help buy this stuff? Who's going to help buy the factories or help invest in those factories? Who's going to buy the products in which are made from those factories? So money takes a big role here. Also, intellect, intelligence. Not only do we look at the people that are available here, but this is one of the things where the government has stepped in and actually helped us out with community colleges. let's say you start up a new factory here in Rockingham County making um, motorcycles. Well, if we were making motorcycles here in Rockingham County, I would expect the community colleges nearby to offer classes that would be beneficial for that factory. That's one of the reasons why you have community colleges nearby. Um, Take Greensboro, for instance, when they got their factory for making Honda jet aircraft, and they began making the factory to produce that, the community colleges nearby began offering classes in jet propulsion. So, what does your community have to offer? Do you have a large workforce with the intelligence? Do you have the support, aka community colleges or colleges, to help support your industry? That is also considered to be capital. You, my people, are capital. Labor, when we look at labor, does that labor workforce, is it available? If you have an area where there's very low unemployment, it might be difficult for a new business to start up because you may have difficulties finding people to work in your factory. So you may have to actually pay more money in order to attract workers from other jobs to your job. Whereas if you have a large educated population with a fairly high unemployment, you may not have to offer as much money or incentives in order to get people to work at your factory. So this labor comes into play. Also remember, labor can also be capital by the fact of how much intelligence it has. You know, inventiveness, the ability to be able to educate those workers, those laborers. And then entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is the investment in the companies by other businesses to help you grow and be successful. So is there a support of investors in the area? Do you have intellect? Intelligence in entrepreneurship, a idea that things can be changed in order to benefit your country, your company. Hold on a second. All right, sorry about that. Dogs, go figure, right? All right, shortages, supply versus shortages. When we look at what they are, when making a factory, you do not really want a surplus. The amount of something left over when requirements have been met is considered to be a surplus. This is money sitting around doing nothing. So if you have a warehouse and you've made a whole bunch of product and for some reason or another you've been unable to get that product into the market for people to be able to buy, that is considered to be a surplus. So you've got money just sitting around waiting for people to buy your stuff. Okay. Shortages, on the other hand, is when you don't have enough to meet the need. You don't want that. If you go to a restaurant and they don't have enough food to feed all the customers there, or it takes too long for the customer to get that food, then it is considered to be a shortage. And because of this, people will quickly lose interest. If you've ever been to a restaurant and been asked to wait, and been put on a wait list and have to wait to get in, at some point you decide or start thinking to yourself, well, I can just go somewhere else and eat. And that is exactly what happens with products if you don't have enough of them. If you put out a brand new cell phone that everybody wants, but you don't have enough of it, and you tell people, well, more will be coming in the next few months, and you can get yours then, they will eventually lose interest because they had to wait. People want their stuff and they want it now. They don't want to have to wait on it. And I don't really blame them. So, there you are. Scarcity can also be, in class, we would normally play a game of musical chairs where people are being left out because of an insufficient supply of chairs. So there is a scarcity factor. Now, there's good scarcity and bad scarcity. How can I say this? Good scarcity. Anytime Apple does the best I've ever seen of scarcity. Whenever Apple comes out with a brand new phone, they stockpile up what seems to be almost an infinite supply of these cell phones, but they won't put them out until a release date. And then they build up a lot of hype about it in order to get people interested in the phone. But at the same time, they say we only got X number of these phones. So there is this idea that if you don't get in line fast enough, you won't have the newest, latest, and greatest gadget. And because of that, this is sort of like the cool factor. Scarcity can be a cool factor if it's done right, where you hype it up just the right amount in order to get people interested in being the only ones who have that. So this is why people stand in long, long lines on the day of a release of a new phone in order to get the newest phone in their hand. It is a cool factor that has been produced through scarcity. The idea that if you don't get in line and you don't get there early enough, you will not be one of the lucky ones to get the newest, latest, and greatest. Now, good news is Apple also understands that if those who don't get the phone have to wait too long, then they will lose interest and will not be happy. So, they have a supply of phones coming to meet the second wave, the people who showed up late. In order not to lose their business, that wait is not too long. Usually you get your phone within 10 days to 2 weeks. So 10 to 12 days you should have your phone. Now, for the people who stood in line and got there early, they're the coolest people in the world for 2 weeks because they are the ones with the new phone. And then, because the wait isn't that bad, the second round people, the people who missed out or were unable to get a phone of that scarcity, they will receive their phone quick enough that they are satisfied with the product and keep buying. However, wish they could have gotten it quicker. So they will try again on the next phone. Apple has learned how to use scarcity to its advantage. Once again, if those who didn't get the phone on the first round were unable to get it for, say, a month or so, eventually that phone will lose interest. This is why Apple's not putting out any phones right now, because of the fact that getting stuff through China means that they cannot predict the scarcity cool factor well enough to guarantee that sales will be good enough for their newest phone. So they're holding off actually till sometime next year. I think the earliest may be December if things go back to normal. But honestly, to tell you the truth, I wouldn't be surprised that if COVID-19 keeps going on, if Apple doesn't push back their next phone till next spring, when they can guarantee their scarcity factor. Remember, they want people to want the product, but they don't want them to get upset if they have to wait a little bit for it. If they wait too long, it's like being at the restaurant and being put on a wait list. They tell you it's a half hour, but then it turns into an hour. And then when you finally do get seated, you sit there forever and ever waiting for the person to come take your order. And then it seems like your order will never come. And this becomes a place where you don't want to ever go back to. This is how restaurants lose business because people want it now. They don't want it later. They're willing to wait if it's a good product for a little bit. But too long, not good enough. Keep that in mind. All right, we're going to pick up with supply and demand tomorrow. So today, hopefully you understand today what scarcity is. It is when you do not have enough product and you have to wait for it. There is good scarcity, such as the hype that Apple uses, and then there's bad scarcity, when things are taking so long to get that people lose interest. It's a very fine balancing act. Human beings are curious creatures. We want our stuff now, and we want it the best now. And this is the way we have always been. However, if the product is good enough, there is a cool scarcity factor that can be monopolized on. but it is a tricky game. So generally speaking, we will talk about this game in which they play, known as supply and demand, and what it means to have equilibrium. We will talk about that tomorrow. All right, guys. I hope you had a good day, and I will talk to you tomorrow. Supply and demand. Peace.